Everybody's wrong about Joker. And I mean everybody. The people who've seen it, the people who refuse to see it, the people who saw it and thought it was some sort of a right-wing screed, the people who saw it and thought it was some sort of a left-wing screed. They're all wrong, and today I'm here to talk about why. It's a bold statement, but it's one that I stand behind. Now, I've broken my rantings into 5 categories of groups or individuals that I think have bad takes, and I think they're all bad takes. The first of which is the Venice Film Festival, the one that awarded the Golden Lion to this movie, directed by Todd Phillips and co-written by Scott Silver, starring Joaquin Phoenix as the legendary Batman villain Joker, aka Arthur Fleck, at least in this iteration. Previously, he's been known as Jack Napier, such as from the comics and also from Tim Burton's 1989 film in which Jack Nicholson played him. This movie, first of all, spoilers, if you haven't seen Joker, turn off this video. I was going to say go out and see it, but I'm not quite sure I can recommend that you do that, depending on your sensibilities, which we'll get to in a little bit. Where was I? Oh, yes. The Venice Film Festival awarded this movie the Golden Lion, and the first thing that I thought of when the credits rolled on Joker, when I saw it earlier this week in an advanced screening, and that's not a humble brag, I'm just trying to give you some context of where my head was at. The first thing I thought of was, wow, we are in deep trouble this award season, if this is something that a film festival can award as its top achiever. Now, it's an audacious movie, it looks great, the score is incredible, it's very well acted on all sides, but for me personally, it all comes down to the screenplay and the numerous problems therein. And tying back to that, if you want to get sort of meta, it's the conception of what this movie is supposed to be. Whose perspective is it from? Is it an unreliable narrator situation? Does the movie have a point of view? And Phillips and Silver don't seem to be interested in answering those questions, which in very deft hands can be seen as a tasty ambiguity, or it can also just be a cover for bad art. Now, the Venice Film Festival, people gave this movie an 8-minute standing ovation. I can kind of understand why, because it's really well put together, and Joaquin Phoenix delivers what people might call a powerhouse performance, and I wouldn't deny him that. But really, the best movie, this is the pinnacle for 2019. I don't know. I've seen better films. I haven't seen movies that are this buzzworthy, perhaps, and maybe that was part of it. People feel obligated, at least if not motivated by some kind of a political ideology, then at least they feel like they should stand up and cheer for something as radical and audacious as this movie at least claims to be. But as far as holding this out as something that's going to stand the test of time, it's very puzzling to me. This movie, I don't know if it's going to be thought of in that high a regard, certainly not in the same way that The Dark Knight was with Heath Ledger's iconic game-changing performance back in 2008. There are certain people who say that about Joaquin Phoenix's performances. Well, yeah, I was going to say performance, but I guess I slipped there and made it plural. He does give a couple of different performances here, and that's one of my criticisms with the movie. By the way, you can go to kickseat.com and listen to the hour-long podcast roundtable discussion I did with 3 fellow critics last week after the screening if you want to hear some more in-depth thoughts. This is more just some commentary of my own regarding all the buzz going around of this movie, especially at the end of opening weekend where it blew past all sorts of box office records. My second point of contention is with left-wing film critics, as I'll call them. They are the ones who are critiquing the film because of a concern about what this will ignite in the right-wing so-called community. Incels, or involuntary celibates, or MGTOW people, and that stands for men going their own way. Essentially, all the commentary we've heard for the last several years regarding disaffected white loners who shoot up theaters and do all sorts of atrocious acts, the concern, I don't know if it's genuine concern or concern trolling or just clickbait or what, but the alleged concern is that Arthur Fleck is such a pathetic character that society spits on and treats like garbage that is going to inspire incels and other kind of weird drifters to commit similar violent acts and lash out against society, similar to what they see in the film. As I said in an earlier commentary on the podcast, I don't see that being a problem. At least this does not incite people who are even on the edge to commit acts of violence, because Arthur Fleck is a cartoon character. Even though he's based on a comic book character, there's a difference between a realistic or a sort of a heightened portrayal of someone on the edge and just throwing a whole bunch of hard life characteristics at a character and seeing what they do. And that's the case with Arthur Fleck. He was adopted, he was abused and tied to a radiator, he grew up with a psychotic mother, he's socially awkward, he's got a condition where he can't help laugh. I mean, this guy is the Job of the DC Extended Universe, and it's just kind of strange to watch this and think this is the person who's going to become ostensibly Batman's arch nemesis. There's nothing particularly brilliant about him except for when the screenplay calls for there to be something special about him. For most of the film, he's kind of a mumbling, awkward, stumbling, inarticulate dweeb. But then in the climactic TV talk show scene with Robert De Niro's character, who'd kind of given him a hard time in the public arena, he becomes this very articulate guy who monologues worse than a James Bond villain. Now, a lot of what Fleck talks about in that monologue could be seen as an opening to a discussion about what's going on in present-day America. The movie takes place in 1981 Gotham, but it really is meant to be a commentary on 2019 cancel culture and the death of comedy and all this other stuff that Todd Phillips has talked about in interviews. It's a very ham-handed kind of message. I think this movie requires nuance. It requires screenplay with about probably 3 or 4 more drafts in order to figure out what it really wants to say and how it wants to go about saying it, instead of just dropping these little idea bombs all over the place and watching things explode, as opposed to really making an impact with the commentary. So yeah, there are critics who tackled the film from that perspective, even weeks before the movie officially came out, coming out of other film festivals, or just think pieces about what this could mean. There was that weird government high alert a few weeks ago about how the feds were going to be stationed in screenings to prevent violence if it should outbreak. And so far we haven't seen anything, knocking on wood that we don't. But yeah, nothing has happened, and it just seems more like phony hype surrounding a movie that is frankly not deserving of it. Again, I'm glad nothing has happened, but also I think one of the reasons that there's not much in this powder keg to blow up is because it's not a very intelligent, well put together, well thought out movie. And the quote-unquote left-wing critics that I respect are the ones who took the movie apart on a technical basis for the merits of its storytelling or lack thereof. I'm thinking of Eric Childress of the Movie Madness podcast specifically. You should definitely check out his report from the Toronto International Film Festival. So yeah, there's a pretty decent divide on the critical spectrum. I know critics have gotten a lot of backlash from the right-wing cultural critics, who are my next target of ire in this little screed. The people who really want this to be the giant middle finger to political correctness and the cancel culture, it really isn't that. And again, it's because Arthur Fleck is not a character who represents anybody really, or at least the people in society who would go see a movie, who can have the wherewithal to scrape together change and get on a bus and go watch a film. He's a straight up lunatic who belongs in an asylum, and not, this is long before he becomes the Joker. So if you're just talking about lonely, disaffected guys who feel like they're being overlooked by society, that would have been a really interesting movie, but that's not who Arthur Fleck is. And I was pretty let down by that. I was looking, with all the commentary and speculation coming out about this movie, I thought it was going to be something a bit more, with something more contemporary on its mind, and that just did not turn out to be the case. But yeah, it's not, in that closing monologue, Arthur Fleck does sort of, well, I guess he was Joker by then, he does berate the people who look down on those in society who are not the beautiful people. He talks about how people are afraid to laugh anymore, except at other people as subjects of derision. But he doesn't really get to anything that I don't think there's any takeaways there, at least nothing that I could see beyond something very broad. I don't know that the movie is smart enough to offer that kind of a cultural critique. Again, he is a cartoon character, and for those who see him as somebody inspiring incels, well, the movie isn't really interested enough in the idea of Arthur Fleck's love life to talk about whether or not he has difficulty with women. Women don't really seem to enter the picture except in the form of Zazie Beetz' Sophie character. She lives down the hall with her daughter, and it turns out their entire romance is a figment of his imagination, which might be an indication that he's an involuntary celibate, but it doesn't speak to him being a member of MGTOW, because he fantasizes about having a relationship with this woman and wanting to get involved and wanting to reach out and make that connection, which is not something you generally hear from men going their own way, as it were. So yeah, the whole idea just kind of falls apart once you take those ideas and look for how this particular piece of art meshes with them, or in this case, doesn't mesh with them. Comic book movie fans, they're the next ones on my list. There seems to be a desire still for a sense of legitimacy in terms of comic book movies that comic book movie fans and comics readers are thirsting for. Even after a decade plus of movies like The Dark Knight and The Avengers and Avengers Endgame becoming, the highest grossing movie of all time, I think that's still the case. I get whooped Avatar earlier this year. So yeah, they've won. Everyone is into comics, into comic book movies, or at least they acknowledge that they're a force to be reckoned with. But still, there's this idea that comic book movies are their own genre that aren't necessarily to be taken seriously, except in terms of financial returns. I was hoping that Joker would be a movie to sort of elevate the medium, not that it needs it, but I am interested in seeing a real adult take on these characters. And we haven't really seen a lot of that, except maybe in the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, which got a little bit goofy toward the end, honestly. I think The Dark Knight is still the high watermark, but I have a lot of problems with that movie too. So when I heard that Martin Scorsese was going to be producing a film about the Joker that took place in a gritty 1980s Gotham, and the model was going to be Taxi Driver and the King of Comedy, I thought, great, I want to see that. Even if it is Todd Phillips, the Hangover guy, I still maintain that The Hangover 2 is a really underrated, not comedy, but a dark piece of performance art almost. Phillips took these characters from this first movie, which felt like it was supposed to be a one-off that ended up becoming a runaway success, was strong-armed into making a sequel and decided, all right, I'm going to explore these characters I don't really like, and I'm going to show how much I hate them and put them in these horrible situations. I thought it was really funny and very dark. By the time Hangover 3 rolled around, I don't know, but it is within Todd Phillips' capabilities, I think, to turn around a film that really gets deep into certain the psychology of men and camaraderie and what it's like to be on the outside of those social circles. I just don't think this movie is it. Someone I was watching on Twitter said that if you wanted to see a great profile of, or an example of what this movie Joker was supposed to be, you can go check out the movie Joe, starring Peter Boyle from, I believe it was the 1970s. That is an excellent recommendation about a guy who is sort of overlooked and downtrodden, who kind of gets enamored with this idea of doing something really big, and is sort of encouraged by that and does something horrible and horribly public with really bad ramifications. But I'm kind of getting off track here, pardon. I would like to say that comic book movie fans, I hear where you're coming from, but this is not the movie to hitch your wagon to. It is a mess. It is, I can't even say inspired by it, rips off two really great movies, The King of Comedy and Taxi Driver. It adds on a lot of stuff that is very contrived, not very slick or well thought through. Some people are responding to it, and I get that. But again, from an outsider's perspective, because I'm not in anybody's head, thank goodness for them, that it feels like they want this movie to be something that's not so bad that they're willing to overlook its numerous flaws. The last person that I'll talk about who is absolutely wrong about the Joker, and I hope you've stuck with me this far. That person is me. I am fully willing to admit that my hot take on the film is incorrect. Art is subjective. And yeah, I did not enjoy this movie. It was one of my highly anticipated movies of the year, and certainly the #1 of the fall. I am a big fan of dark, gritty movies with complicated, compromised characters. I love A Clockwork Orange and Natural Born Killers and John Wick, which, let's rewind the tape a little bit here. For those who are worried about the glamorization of gun violence and mental health issues, why aren't there protests outside of John Wick 3? Why is there a John Wick 3? This movie about a hitman who comes out of retirement to just go around killing a bunch of people because someone murdered his dog, and then he's just racking up the body count by the hundreds throughout 3 very popular sequels. It's a bit weird, but you know, that's just the way things are, I guess. By the way, I love the John Wick movies, except for #2. I think that's kind of trash. Anyway, I'm fully willing to admit that I'm wrong about the Joker because, as I mentioned, art is subjective. There are people who are responding to this movie, and yeah, I'm responding to it too, just not in a positive way. I've got a lot of questions, and not necessarily questions that I feel are the result of any kind of master grand plan, like Todd Phillips is some kind of a Christopher Nolan level genius that he's pulling strings that I just won't be able to catch until, you know, the 5th viewing. But, you know, maybe I'm wrong. And maybe the other people who are giving me crap for not liking this movie are wrong. But who knows? The one cool thing about all the conversations happening about the Joker is that it reminds me of another comic book character who is often misread, misunderstood, and has a sort of hero worship applied to them, and that is Rorschach. Figure that one out. And while you're mulling that over, please like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment down below if you think I'm completely off base. We can have that conversation. If you agree with me, we can have that conversation as well. I appreciate you listening to me ramble a bit about the Joker. I know there are a million YouTube videos coming out of the weekend about this, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents. Or I guess my 6 cents, because I think this is the 3rd time I've talked about this movie this week. But yes, and also please go to kickseat.com and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and all that good stuff. I drop several episodes a week with long-form, often roundtable discussions with other critics about contemporary and classic movies. So yeah, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.